Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Meep Meme Nation. We're joined today by Dan Nerdahl. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, that's pretty close. That's spot on.
There we go. Covering mostly UTSA baseball for Alamo Audible. And David Harrison, again, welcome back, man. Glad to have you. Golf season about to start. How you feeling?
Oh, I'm excited, man. I mean, feels like it's been a long Christmas break. I'm ready to get back at it.
Definitely. Dan, thanks for coming on, man. We really appreciate it. Again, just to start off, for people who maybe don't know who you are, your background, could you give us a little bit of rundown of where you come from, where you are at UTSA right now, and what you cover?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Dan Nerdahl. I'm a senior at UTSA. I've got this spring semester that just started today, actually, when we're recording this, and then the fall semester I'll be doing my student teaching, and so projected to graduate December of 24. So it's coming up quick. And originally grew up in Minnesota. You know, the listeners on my podcast, people on Twitter, they know I'm an avid Minnesota Twins fan. I'm unfortunately a Minnesota Vikings fan. Life of a Minnesota sports fan. I've actually got a book. It's funny, and it's all of the terrible things that have happened in Minnesota sports throughout history. And I open that up anytime I want to cry myself to sleep. But yeah, grew up in Minnesota, moved down to Texas in 2012. Been living in San Antonio with my wife since 2016. We've got two little ones. Our daughter is 2 and 3 months, almost 2.5, and then we just had our son, and he was born August 30th, like 2 days before the Houston football game, UTSA Houston game. So he just turned 4 months, and so it's busy. Life's moving quick, but baseball season's around the corner, and excited to get going with it.
Nice. What motivated you to pursue sports coverage, especially with UTSA?
Yeah, so I'm dating myself a little bit. It goes back to high school, and I'm a little older. I graduated high school in 2009, and I spent the last 8 years in the Air Force Reserves. I just separated in March. And so when I was trying to figure out what to do post-military and everything, decided I wanted to go get my teaching certification. And so enrolled at UTSA. I mean, we live right down the road from campus, so it was kind of the easy decision. And I mean, it seemed like a great school, and they really put a focus on education. So, started taking classes at UTSA for a kinesiology major with a concentration in physical education. But also, as far as like the sports broadcasting or, coverage, if you will, in high school, I really had an interest for it. And I actually had a couple opportunities. So I wrestled in high school, and I started late, so I was never on varsity. We came from a pretty good program. But I loved the sport, and I loved diving into the technical aspects of it and the kind of broadcasting side of it. So I had a couple opportunities in high school to be on the local radio as like a kind of the color commentator. So for our like section meets and everything, you had the play-by-play guy that was doing the radio coverage of our wrestlers in the section tournaments, and I would provide the color commentary for those individual wrestlers and just some ins and outs of the sport. And then it kind of just fizzled out. I went a different direction after high school and didn't pursue it. So then when I got to UTSA, obviously being a huge sports fan, huge college football fan, we were just talking offline about EA Sports and college football coming back for video games and everything. Took a liking to UTSA football, and so I was like, well, I need a podcast to listen to. So started looking around and came across Alamo Audible. At the time, it was Alamo Dome Audible, and Jared and Adrian do a great job covering the sport, covering UTSA athletics, covering UTSA football. So enjoyed it right away. And it was the fall of last year, and they were just kind of talking. They always leading into episodes and then finishing up episodes. They'll kind of what you guys do at Meep Nation. They'll kind of wrap up any other pertinent information, anything else happening around UTSA. And Jared just kind of casually threw out there like, hey, if you ever want to do a guest article for Alamo Audible, any support work for us, let us know. So I just messaged Jared on Twitter and was like, hey, I'm a student at UTSA. I love baseball. I like paying attention to sports and everything. If you want anyone to cover baseball for you, I can give it a shot, basically, kind of just saying, let's see what happens. And so we started last fall. So it would have been fall of 2022. of just, a couple articles. Like I did a signing day article, I did a facilities article, and where UTSA athletics was at in facilities wise, moving into the American Athletic and college athletics in general. But just rolled with that. And then the very first interview that I did, and it didn't actually push until a little bit into the season, but it was a Where Are They Now? And that's one of my favorite features that I do, is interviewing former baseball players, whether newly graduated, like I had Luke Malone, Shane Stardashny on recently, or going back as far as like 2007, 2008, and just seeing, like, talking about those guys and their time at UTSA, but also seeing what life is like after baseball and the things that they got from baseball, how that prepared them for where they are now, and the skills and everything that they got from baseball and how that helped them where they are in life after baseball. Because even those guys that were fortunate enough to have their name called at the next level, and however long that journey was, it ends for everyone. So just finding out what they enjoyed during their time at UTSA and everything. But that's a long way of saying my very first interview that I did was with Ray Redding of Me Beep Apparel and Josh Wilson, who helps him out with some creative designing, and just talking about baseball and talking about NIL and how all of that got started. And, last season did coverage through a blog and a podcast and some guest podcasts here and there, and it's taken off, and it's been a great journey. It's been a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like with UTSA, at least, a lot of the, I guess, like, coverage has always been focused on football, and rightly so. I mean, there's been a lot of success there, but baseball definitely is one that, especially over the past few years, has definitely been starting to pick up steam. And we've had players, from my understanding, that have actually gone to the pros. We've had players, I think, with the Angels. From your experience, what you've seen, how has that growth sort of gone forward over the past few years, and where do you kind of see it headed?
I think in a lot of ways, I mean, with college athletics, if you can just catch steam, there's no stopping you. You've seen, if you get the right support from an administration in there, if you can get the right coach in there, the right players in there, and really start to improve that brand and put that brand on a national spotlight, it can really start to draw attention. So specifically with baseball, you mentioned players recently drafted, like, Simon Miller was drafted in the summer by the Cincinnati Reds. Luke Malone signed with the Boise Hawks up in the Pioneer League independent baseball. I'm curious to see, like, guys, there's some guys that we have right now that are definitely going to be interesting to watch come this summer. And as far as the MLB draft, even some guys that are still active, Karan Patel, he was the first player of Indian descent drafted in the MLB back in 2019. Spent a little time in the minor leagues, played a little independent baseball, still active, and he was just the first player ever drafted in Baseball United, which is a brand new kind of winter league that they're starting in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. So I think with Coach Hallmark and his staff, they've shown that they're on an upward trajectory, and every season that he's been here, they've continued to improve in terms of wins and national brands, whether it's getting ranked for the first time in program history, like what we saw last year, just on the edge of setting a program record of individual of wins in a season. The last two seasons, they were 1 win shy of tying the program record, 2 wins of 40 wins for the first time ever. So I think they just continue to improve, and they're just going to keep going, like, in the upward direction.
Nice. What was your journey like? I mean, I know Alamo used to be Alamo to Audible, and now Alamo Audible. I mean, for me at least, when I was back at UTSA back in 2013, graduated in 2017, I mean, they were like the mainstay, the guys that, really pulled me into UTSA sports. How's your experience been, like, working with them? And I know, Adrian and them, they've been doing such a great job over the past few years.
Yeah, they're a pleasure to work for. I mean, they are professional in every aspect of what they do, from how they interact with reaching out to people, requesting things, getting myself access. Like if they're reaching out to someone in the baseball department and trying to get myself access for something, Jared and Adrian and Aaron, our creative content designer, they are just very professional in how they go about things. And I think that translates to what you and the listeners hear kind of on the other side of it. Mm-hmm. And what they put into their work, what they put into just their prep work. Like I remember one of the very first questions I asked them, so I reached out to them. I was like, hey, I want to do this, but I kind of want to talk to you guys first and see like what all it entails, because I want to make sure I can bring 100% to the table. And I asked Jared and Adrian, I was like, how many hours a week do you think you spend on like podcast prep or just podcast work? And they were just like, there's no answer really, because from Jared's film breakdowns to listening to interviews to watching, they watch the game again after, like they rewatch it, and recruiting websites and everything with that and all the bonus content. I think it's just been a real joy to work with them, and they make my job real easy. I'm not going to deny like how much they help with, reviewing blogs and editing podcasts. And like I mentioned already, reaching out to people if we want to send it from like the professional or the business aspect of Alamo Audible correspondence. But yeah, it's been great.
Nice. Dave?
So I guess kind of going back to our players in the major leagues, kind of you see with football, the high level mid majors, they are able to put people in the NFL. Kind of how is that with baseball? Is it a lot easier at a mid major to get to the major leagues? I know they have a lot more rounds in the draft and a lot more people get drafted. So I kind of was curious to see kind of where it stacks up mid majors versus like Power 5 Division Ones.
Yeah, and I'm learning it myself, because as much as I love baseball, as much as I love college athletics, you guys can probably attest to this. There's a different way you go about it when you're starting to do it in a professional or a side gig type of way. Like you're looking for different things, you're trying to pay more attention. So I'm learning as I'm going of like where, like which websites have the best resources, which websites and which national outlets provide the best coverage. It definitely seems like there still is a lot of recognition with the Power Fives. Baseball, you kind of almost have the Power Four. The Big Ten isn't quite on the same level, and obviously that's a whole nother discussion, right? With football and the Power 5, Power 2, whatever. But if you look at the traditional Power 5, you still tend to see a lot of guys get drafted from those schools. I think a lot of major league teams, if you've got player A and player B, player A goes to Arkansas, LSU, A&M, player B goes to UTSA, UAB, Wichita State. It seems like looking at last year's draft that they're going to go to that bigger school. Now, the other thing you've got to think about with the draft with baseball is you've got more rounds, but high school kids are eligible. Mm-hmm. So like Minnesota Twins, their first round pick last year was a high school kid out of California. And so you've got less rounds because after COVID, Commissioner Robert Manfred, did a drawdown of the minor league teams and reduced a lot of the minor league teams. So they didn't need as many rounds. So they went from like 40 rounds down to 20. So cut it in half basically. And then you've got high school kids vying for those spots as well. So like UTSA's got a kid, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, Robert Orlowski, and he got drafted by the Red Sox, but didn't get drafted until the 20th round. So he decides, well, I'm not going to sign. I'm going to go to college. So I think that's the hard thing too with the mid majors is you've got these young kids where some teams are like, we want to get this kid right away and start developing him with our scouts and our technicians and our team. And then you've got the Power Fives, which when in doubt, go with the school in the SEC, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know with like the NBA, there's obviously sort of been more of a push. It hasn't fully fleshed out yet, but more of a push obviously for like focusing on more maybe high school level players and opening up maybe that potential route of them going either directly to the NBA or maybe going to D League for a bit. Is that something, at least with baseball, you see potentially risk overall to college baseball, where you'll have fewer and fewer maybe top level talent actually choosing to go into the college level and then play professionally, as opposed to just going directly from high school to baseball? Or do you think it's going to maybe not really pick up that much steam?
I think lately, I think NIL is a huge one about this. And it seems like every podcast I listen to now and every podcast I do with a former player, we somehow roundabout way come back to NIL. And I try to spin it in the positive way of networking and promoting your brand and everything. But as far as baseball and in high school, I think it's interesting because let's say you get drafted in high school and maybe you don't get drafted in a high round. Let's say you get drafted in those middle to later rounds and your signing bonus isn't great, but then you run the risk of, okay, so this team's not investing a lot in me because I'm not a first rounder. They're not giving me millions of dollars. You look at like what Paul Skeens signed for and some other players that were in those first 5 picks signed for millions and millions of dollars. But then you're a professional baseball player, which I'm not trying to take anything away from. That's way higher than the level I ever reached playing baseball. But you run the risk of kind of getting lost in the shuffle of rookie baseball, low A, single A, double A, and there's all those guys vying for those spots. So it's almost like some guys now are like, hey, I'm going to go to college. Either I'm going to go to a mid-major out of high school. I'm going to go to a Power 5. If it doesn't work out for me, I can go down to a mid-major. I can go down to a JUCO. But I can capitalize on NIL. I can make some money. I can continue to develop, and then I can get drafted. And maybe by the time I get drafted, I'm getting called up to double A to start instead of low A ball or rookie ball. Mm-hmm. And you're actually seeing guys stay in college longer because there's less rounds to be drafted in, and you can capitalize on the NIL. And so I think you're actually seeing more guys go into college as opposed to, and there's just so many opportunities. I mean, Division I in general, there's 300 schools that have college baseball. And that doesn't even get into Division II, Division III, JUCO. Yeah. So I think a lot of guys, it's like, hey, I'm just going to go this route, and then I can develop myself and maybe get some NIL money and get an education as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think NIL is something that it's just becoming, especially with the past couple of years, particularly with college football, it's just becoming more and more of a present just factor in the overall success of a program. And I think, I mean, you've seen guys like R.G. Manning like get 7-figure deals. They roll out the red carpet. They fly in with a private jet. And even with UTSA, I mean, last year, right, when Frank Harris decided to sign on, they had the whole thing with the mayor and everybody, and he obviously got a 6-figure deal as well. With baseball, college baseball in general, and then even with UTSA, how is that kind of evolving? I know with football, it's obviously evolving very, very quickly. I mean, practically overnight, you had guys out there making 6 figures. With baseball, is that something that you see becoming a bigger and bigger factor in the long-term success of a program, especially with a program like UTSA, where maybe, our funds are not as established as some of these bigger P5 schools? How do we compete against some of these bigger P5 programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with baseball, because it's so technical, I think in a lot of ways you're going to have guys that are still going to go to that kind of historic program. You're going to have guys that if they get a shot at the SEC or the Big 12, they're going to go there. There's a lot of mid-majors that very, very good historically, DBU, ECU, Charlotte. And so I think we've seen just from guys that have been brought in and how Coach Hallmark and his staff have retained guys that it's definitely a great place to play. And it's a desirable place to play. And a lot of the guys love the coaches, and it's a great staff. I think with NIL, like baseball, I think you're going to have, because it still is like an Olympic sport, or maybe it's not the Olympics anymore, but it's still kind of what, not to put a negative term on it, but what a lot of people view as like the minor sport. It's still a smaller sport in terms of revenue. You can make a lot of, I was just talking to James Keithley, UTSA baseball alumnus, last week about this. He said baseball can be a big money maker sport, and you got to do it the right way. It doesn't work for everyone, but you can make a lot of money in baseball, and you can make a lot of revenue with baseball. And so it's there. You see these schools, like I mentioned, ECU, Charlotte, DBU, and they're mid majors, but they're rocking and rolling on Friday night at their park. And ECU is one I'm looking forward to, hopefully in the near future, going down to their park or over to their park for a series and just going to the jungle and seeing what that place is all about. So I think with baseball, you're still not – you might have a guy here or there make, unheard of money, but I think in a lot of ways it's just these guys pushing their own brand and looking for deals. Like a guy that I interviewed, I guess a few months ago now, Caleb Hill, he came from – he went to Nichols State and then went the JUCO route and then came to UTSA last year, plays left field for UTSA. And he just started reaching out to companies, and he's got a few out there. Meep Meep Apparel, Bucked Up is another one, kind of a performance and supplement company. And Boosted is a company that kind of makes your own athlete sponsored apparel. He reached out to them. And so I think probably for a lot of guys, that's the way of going about it.
Yeah.
But then also, like, you see like alumni getting behind it as well, like Runners Rising Project. What's great about Runners Rising Project is they give their donors the option to specify which sport they want to donate to. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a connection to UTSA Baseball or UTSA Golf or tennis, you can go on there and say, hey, I want to do a monthly donation and I want to give X amount of dollars to UTSA Baseball, UTSA Men's Golf, UTSA Women's Basketball. They're running promos all the time. Wayne is doing a lot of good things with them, getting them rocking and rolling. And they just posted their kind of year-end stats the other day. And they made it, it's not going to be retirement money for anyone, but it seems like it helps and everything helps. And that donation and that NIL deal might help that athlete in a way with something they really needed in that moment for providing for something. That's the same thing. Like, I'm sure David could talk about it at length with scholarship opportunities. UTSA baseball college baseball gets 11.7 scholarships. And they just increased this year how many scholarships you can give. You can now have 32 scholarships on your roster, but they still haven't officially done away with that minimum 25% scholarship. Mm-hmm. So it gets real interesting there when coaches are trying to figure out how to put a guy in scholarship, but you got to give them that 25% minimum still. So there's only so much money to go around. So anything these guys can do or guys and girls, these athletes can do to help out and, pay for their school and pay their bills and stuff is definitely worthwhile.
Definitely. I know with the move from Conference USA to the AAC, at least with football, a lot of different changes. I mean, you have teams like Memphis and historical teams like ECU that are pretty big contenders. As far as baseball goes, how do you see the move from Conference USA to AAC affecting baseball? Is this a more competitive league? I know, we've obviously lost Houston and Cincinnati, and there have been people out there that say it's more of a lateral move. But as far as baseball goes, is the quality of competition something that, we as UTSA fans should take note of?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this moving to the AAC outside of ECU, which is its own giant, and just their historicalness, their history as a baseball program, I think a lot of the teams that I would say I'm worried about or going to keep my eye on are actually coming over with UTSA from Conference USA, Florida Atlantic, Charlotte. I'm trying to think of the schools that come over. Rice, historically Rice is really good, but they've been down lately. And
do we play Wichita State? I know they're not a football school, but
yeah, Wichita State's in there. They're another one. Like Wichita State, interestingly enough, is the only school in the American Athletic that's actually won the College World Series. Right. As good as ECU is, they've never actually made it to Omaha. Mm-hmm. So they still have to climb. Like, we're trying to climb the hurdle of getting to a regional for the first time since 2013 and getting to that super regional, which I put it out there a few months ago. I think you give Coach Hallmark and his staff a few more years and he's going to get UTSA to that super regional. But Wichita State, they're in a rebuild. They had a weird thing happen with their head coach. He kind of left in a weird way, and they just got gutted by the portal. I think they had like 33 or 34 of their guys go to the portal last year. I don't know if all of them ended up leaving or staying. There was an astronomical amount of guys for college baseball. I think over 2,000 players that went to the portal last season for college baseball. So they're one to keep your eye on. Another one that's interesting is Tulane. They had a bad season last year, barely went 500, maybe even didn't go 500, but had a great tournament and won the whole tournament, knocked off ECU, and went to regional as a result. So I'm curious to see how they build on that. But as far as like conference as a whole, I think it's going to be pretty on par with Conference USA. You know, DBU last year kind of slid in to take the spot of Southern Miss as like the top Giants. DBU is a team that outside of 2013, when UTSA beat them in the WAC tournament final, DBU's gone to a regional every year since 2013. So they kind of slid in and took Southern Miss's spot. And then obviously DBU stayed in Conference USA. So now ECU is their spot. I mean, they came in today. D1 Baseball just dropped their preseason rankings, and they were the highest mid-major at number 11. So it's very possible that when they come to San Antonio in the Birdbath in the middle of March to open conference play, that it could be a top 10 opponent for UTSA.
Nice.
So I guess I'm kind of talking about that. So I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, they ended up losing to La Tech in the conference final and ended up missing out on a regional spot that can have a large bid due to like strength of schedule purposes. So I guess kind of going into the American, do you see that being a possibility again, or do you think just the overall level of competition is going to be good enough to where if they're a really good team and say they do lose in the conference championship, they could get that at-large bid?
Yeah, it's tough. And that's a whole nother podcast in itself, the RPI. And RPI, it's funny because it was actually created for college basketball, and college basketball doesn't even use it anymore. But it's how they look at your strength of schedule, and 25% of it is your winning percentage, 50% of it is your opponent's winning percentage, 25% of it is your opponent's winning percentage. So 75% of it is out of your control. You know, it's all based on your opponent, what they do. And it doesn't take into account how bad you beat a team. It doesn't take into account how good the team was when you beat them. And so there's a lot of errors and a lot of holes in it. And D1 Baseball actually partnered with a company called 643 Charts that does data analytics for teams. And one of the things they provide to the casual fans are probability charts. So you'll see like the UTSA versus Tarleton game last year. It was like Tarleton 90% chance to win, 80%, UTSA 99% chance to win, kind of that scale as like the game is going through. And so it's hard because, you know, the quick breakdown is 64 teams go to regionals. 30 of those spots are the automatic qualifiers from your conference champs. 34 spots are for your at-large selections. And last year, the committee basically went down the line RPI ranking across the board, which is extremely frustrating because that season, David, you mentioned 2 years ago, UTSA had an RPI of like 37. They had multiple wins over ranked opponents. They beat Southern Miss 2 times, and they're like, I can't get going about that again. The snub on that was so frustrating. And then next year, they're like, I guess we will pay attention to the RPI a little more. You know, fans on a national scale have seen the frustrations with a committee with just as recent as like the playoff and the selection committees. So I think the guys would tell you, the boys would tell you, the best way to control your destiny in a mid-major is winning the tournament. Because what's also hard, and this kind of is what happened 2 seasons ago, you go into that conference tournament and say you had a favorite, like last year, ECU got upset and didn't win the tournament. Now that's a team that is going to regionals. They're a top 10 team, top 15 team. They're going to regionals. If they don't get that automatic bid, now Tulane has stolen that bid from someone else because Tulane gets an automatic bid, ECU still going, and all of a sudden now you only have 29 or 33 teams for those automatic spots. So that's the hardest thing to predict. And I'm not trying to avoid your question. There's just so much unknown because anything can happen on conference weekend. You know, but I guess to answer it, you want your opponents to have good seasons. So we want Charlotte to have a good season. We want FAU to have a good season, because then if UTSA can go in and take that series from them, maybe even sweep them like they did to FAU last year, then that just helps your RPI go higher and higher. So when the selection committee is looking at it, they're like, hey, UTSA has an RPI of 40. They beat these teams. Let's give them a shot. So it's not unheard of, but I think where it gets hard is when you have those national favorites like DBU, Southern Miss, ECU not win the tournament. It puts a lot more pressure on the committee, because now you're asking the committee to put 3 mid-major teams in, and one of their SEC schools, one of their Big 12 schools don't get to go.
And I guess kind of going into that as well with the RPI rankings and stuff like that. So baseball's a lot different because they're playing 3-game, 4-game series. So does it take into account, so like say UTSA takes 3 or 4 from a school like ECU, does that 4th game mean that much more to get the sweep versus winning the series? Or is it kind of, if they sweep them, great, but if not, they still took 3 or 4 from them?
Yeah, a lot of it depends on who you're playing, and that's what we saw last year with UTSA. They really struggled in those Tuesday games. They started off well, but they just did not finish well in the Tuesday games. They lost a lot of Tuesday games they should have won. ACU, UTRGV, Sam Houston State. That was a toss-up. They're a pretty good opponent, but they lost a Tuesday game to UIW. And the thing about RPI is losing to a school that is worse than you is a lot more detrimental than losing to a school that's better to you. So you're playing ECU, you want to win all 3. If anything, you want to win 2. Even if you win 1 against ECU, it's not going to. It obviously would be better to win 2 or 3, but it's not going to hurt you as much as if you go drop a game to Rice or to a school that is an RPI of like 185, because and that's where that disconnect is there with RPI is like, hey, like some of these schools can only play who they can play, and on a Tuesday you can only travel so far, and you can only play the schools that are willing to play you. So why are these schools like? And that's what we saw at the end of last season is you had some schools that were actually canceling games because even if they had beat that school, it wouldn't have even helped them. So that's the other thing about RPI. It can really hurt you if you lose to a school you shouldn't lose to. But even if you beat them just by the disparity in where they are and where you are, it could still hurt you even if you win a game. So then it's hard. It's a hard argument for the coach. It's like, hey, we won this game, but we still dropped 10 points in the RPI. And that's just about the calculations and strength of schedule and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, you want to win as many as you can, obviously. But if I'm going to lose, if I'm the coach of the team, the games I'm losing are the ones that against those better teams.
No, that makes sense, because I know, like I said, baseball is totally different with scheduling purposes and things like that. And so I know kind of those 1-game midweek games, like you're saying, those Tuesday games, I know those can either have a really big factor in a good way if you do beat a good team, but they could also really hurt you if you're playing a team you should beat and then you don't beat them. That's really just going to kill you.
Yeah, very little to gain and a lot to lose, unfortunately.
I know with college football, there's a lot of politics involved if you want to get to the highest level as far as making the championship. Obviously, those guys, meet up in Dallas and they're going to pick a bunch of different teams. With baseball, trying to go to the World Series, as far as, being a team like UTSA, still being D1, but obviously not a P5. How does that road look? Is that something that is kind of impossible to do in the current environment? Or is that something that, compared to at least with like college football, is a lot more of a feasibility?
Yeah, I don't think it's impossible. Interestingly enough, I think, and maybe there's some that know a lot more about the game than I do that would disagree with this. I think super regionals is the easiest round to win because it's just you and one other team, and it's a best 2 out of 3 series. And we've seen in baseball, any team can win 1 or 2 games against another team. You look at Major League Baseball, just about every team wins 60 games, every team loses 60 games. It's what happens with those 40, 45 games that kind of makes or breaks, like who has good seasons and who doesn't. With college baseball, you get to a regional and it might be an uphill battle. You might be playing an LSU. You might be playing a Wake Forest. You might be playing an ECU in the first round. But at that point, it's just, hey, whoever wins the series, whoever comes out of this bracket goes to super regionals, and then whoever goes to whoever wins the super regionals goes to the College World Series. Everyone has a shot theoretically, whether by getting that automatic bid. Now, I'll say this. It's a harder path in that the college football playoff is 12 teams, and for UTSA, you win you're the top group of 5 school and you got that automatic spot. Whereas like to get to Omaha, if you will, you got to get selected for regional. You got to win your regional. You got to win your super regional. But at the same time, it's just different, I guess, because college football, if you're the highest group of 5 team, then you're going. But baseball, you just have to win your conference, and you don't have to be the best mid-major conference. You just have to win your conference, and you got that automatic spot. How you're doing, how your RPI is, how many rank wins you have, and everything, that's going to help you get in a more favorable regional. But there's 64 teams that go to regionals, whereas college football, there's only 12 that go to the playoff.
Got it. And with I know one of the rivalries we have, obviously very established, Texas State. For some of the other sports, teams like UNT are a big one. And then with football, Houston is one that's kind of, starting to come out. With baseball, who would you say are like our biggest, couple of rivalries that we have currently?
Yeah, Texas State, you nailed that one. That one's huge. And I was just talking to James Keithley a lot about this because he had a very big role in 2007 against Texas State when UTSA beat them, and that win secured UTSA's very first ever regular season conference championship, and when they were in the Southland Conference. I believe they were still in the Southland Conference for that. And he talked about that Texas State rivalry when he was in school with them. Now UTSA plays them just twice a season. They do a home and away. Last year, UTSA went down there in March, just completely destroyed them, beat them 11-2, home runs. They had one inning where they batted around the lineup. All 9 guys came to the plate. They come to the Bird Bath in April. Place was rocking and rolling, had about 1,100 in attendance. Coach Hallmark got tossed. There was some controversy on a no home run from Matt King, and people were chirping with each other. Fans were going at it. So Texas State, I think, is probably one of the bigger ones just in terms of proximity. And now the football stuff is kind of building back up again with what G.J. Kinney's doing over there. So that's a big one to watch. Rice is a big one. I didn't know about that. Kind of some of the former players told me Rice is a big rivalry. The guys always want to do well against Rice. We get a lot of players from Houston, and so that means a lot. And last year, the series at Rice, there was kind of some weird things going on. I didn't get all the details, but just some interesting things going on with some analytic acquisition, we'll call it that. And they kind of squashed that, but that only fuels the fire, right? So yeah. I'd say Rice and Texas State and Charlotte too. I mean, I think Charlotte's a big one. They always bring a good squad to the field, and they knocked UTSA out of the tournament last year, kind of a lopsided loss. UTSA's bats kind of went quiet, but I think Charlotte's going to be a big series this year as well. And then moving over from Conference USA, that's the thing with Rice and Charlotte is you have those schools. You're kind of bringing all of that bad blood with you. You're not trying to start over like with ECU or USF or Wichita State.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as far as NIL goes, obviously it's going to be, unless there's regulation that comes into play, it's going to be, seems to be more and more a battle of the haves and have-nots. And with college football, at least, obviously like Traylor has been more and more adamant about like trying to protect his player base, especially against kind of illegal poaching outside of the portal being open. Is that something that, at UTSA and maybe even other schools as well, is a big issue, is within the portal players being kind of poached as they rise within the ranks of a team?
I haven't seen anything specific. I know that was kind of one of the big pushes of, Runners Rising project is keeping our guys home, giving them a reason to stay here and helping them out and making it possible for them to stay here. As far as like anything poach wise, I know that the guys that UTSA lost to the portal, if you will, or to transfer, they were guys that not necessarily big contributors. I think they probably helped a lot in the practice field. It just on the field it didn't go their way for one reason or another. That could be as simple as being behind a guy that's just a little bit better than you, or some guys just figure it out, and some guys need to go down to that JUCO or for a little bit, or go down to that Division III school for a little bit to try to find themselves again. So I haven't seen anything baseball wise, and I know that the guys that I was kind of keeping my eye on after this last season, all those guys came back, and so I'm excited about that. And it seems that and I think a lot of that, yes, it's NIL. What Mimi Apparel is doing, what Runners Rising Project is doing, what guys are doing out on their own. But I think a lot of it's just the culture that Coach Hallmark and his staff are building at UTSA. And, we've seen the facilities at UTSA outside of a couple, places here and there. And they're improving them. They're doing what they can. But the baseball field is not, if you think of that scene in the Sandlot where the kids are practicing and playing on their dirt patch, and then the preppy kids kind of come over from across town and challenge them to a game. UTSA baseball's facility is probably a little closer to that Sandlot field than where they went and played. But, I think I mentioned it on Twitter a while back, and then the post somehow magically disappeared. But last time I checked, it's still 60 feet, 6 inches to home plate and 90 feet around the base paths. So
definitely. Yeah, and I think facilities is something we'll definitely talk about a little bit more. Caleb will be joining the podcast in a bit. As far as your experience so far with UTSA, whether it's baseball or any other sports, what's been like your favorite memory? And if you want to, you could break it off into obviously your favorite baseball memory and then maybe your favorite other sports memory.
Yeah, for sure. Football wise, 2022 was such a, we called them the cardiac roadrunners, right? But football wise, 2022, I think it's got to be that North Texas game. I was sitting in the student section because, the free ticket, that was the easiest way to go to the game. I will say that was the only season I sat in the student section. And after the 2022 season, I was like, I got to get out of here. I'm too old for this. So I got some season tickets this past season. But I think that North Texas game, it was just going back and forth. And I had a social event I had to get to later that night. And so I was texting my wife. I was like, don't worry, we can ride together. This game's not going to go into overtime. I can be there on time, But then, we kept going back and forth. And then obviously everything that we already know, the one-handed catch by Oscar, the review on 4th and 1. And I remember thinking to myself, if somehow these officials come out and reverse this call and the game's over, this place is going to be a madhouse. Made the right call, the correct call. But seeing JT catch that, and I was on the opposite end of the field, just how loud that place got. It just went crazy in there. And we know the Dome, it gets so loud with, a good crowd and everything. I think football-wise as well, the Houston game last year, just because that was my first ever UTSA football game. So, what better can you ask for than a 3-overtime thriller against Houston? And didn't go UTSA's way, but still a great game. Other sports, it's harder for me to get out to a lot of UTSA athletic events. Just having kids, I only get so much kind of free time, and I try to prioritize it with, being able to provide the best baseball coverage I can. So I tend to lean a little more towards going to the baseball games with the free time that I have. Mm-hmm. But, women's soccer, they played some great games this year. Had some really, I think one of the games, it was against, man, I should know this. And Joe and Caleb are going to give me a hard time for not knowing which game it was. Caleb, if you can put it in the chat, it was whichever one the girls needed to win at the end of the season. And they I think it was FAU, totally outshot them all game. outplayed them, just couldn't find the back of the net. And they had one last shot with like 3 or 4 seconds left, and it just sailed over the top bar. And I remember grabbing Joe Rodriguez. I was like, that was it. That was going to be the goal. And it ended up not being, of course. But, yeah, so that was a pretty exciting game for women's soccer. And then baseball, a lot of good games last year. The A&M one was a lot of fun. Ray Redding and I sat down real close, had some old Ags on our case, thinking we were sitting in someone else's seats. And Ray's like, no, we bought these. That's where we're sitting for this game. But even though they lost it, I always go back to this one. I think the DBU series last year at the Bird Bath in Game 2, UTSA had a disappointing game in Game 1. They played a doubleheader because of the weather, and bottom of the 8th, I was sitting next to Luke Malone's dad, and Josh Colleen came up to the plate, and Greg Malone was like, all right, come on, JK, right center. And second, third pitch at bat just sailed it into the darkness. And that was probably the loudest I heard the Bird Bath ever. And, last season was the season I was there the most. So maybe there's probably been other times that it's been louder, but that place just went crazy. We're doing UTSA chants, we're hugging, high-fiving, hooping and hollering. Baseball will break your sport, baseball will break your heart. And DBU came back that next half inning and went up again and ended up winning the game. But that was probably one of my favorite moments last year was JK just hitting that grand slam.
Nice. Yeah, before we jump to a pause and then bring on Caleb to talk about some facilities and other updates, I guess one of the things that we've always, really harkened on at Meet Team Nation has always been that the secret to UTSA succeeding, particularly with the sports, has been San Antonio. It's been sort of having the city sort of adopt the sports teams here, not just football, but every team that we have. When it comes to baseball, what would sort of be maybe your elevator pitch to, the average San Antonian or even the average sports fan as to why they should follow UTSA baseball right now?
Yeah, I mean, being a city that only has one major sports team, the San Antonio or professional sports league, San Antonio Spurs, I would say what better option to watch great baseball at an affordable and family-friendly location. We can talk about the facilities all day. At the end of the day, for a very reasonable price, you can sit very close to the field. You can be on the berm and maybe chirp at some of the other players and kind of have that romantic seating down the baseline, bring you back to your childhood, let your kids get out there, run around. And on Sundays, they let the kids run the bases after the games for home games. So I would say it's really good baseball and it's a great environment. And you got a lot of fans out there that are educated about the sport. So that's fun. You can meet some people. And a lot of the former players still come back and give back to the sport by supporting the team through being at the games. So typically they kind of either sit down the baselines, either first or third baseline. But, bring your kids out and have them get to meet some of the UTSA baseball greats. And, I know we have the Missions and that's good baseball too. But I think the location of Roadrunner Field and the Bird Bath is great because it's kind of central in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. You got some options. Once we get, up until we get to May or June, it still is like somewhat decent weather. Like it's not super hot yet. Whereas like the summer months of the Missions games, it can be pretty hot out there. So the weather's generally pretty good and it's just a lot of fun.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah. We'll take a quick break right now. Come back with Caleb Hopkins. He'll be talking a little bit about facilities and some of the other sports. We'll be back in a moment.
All right, guys, we're back, and now we have Caleb here to talk a little bit more about UTSA baseball with Dan.
Hey, Dan. So first off, I know that the Bird Bath has gone through a lot of renovations. If you could kind of expand on what all has happened over the off season. I know that a lot of the season ticket holders have found out there's now seat back options. What all's going on?
Yeah, so we'll kind of start with some of the updates that were a little more mandated by the NCAA AAC homeowners association, if you will. One of the things that schools needed to do was, for safety purposes and just safety of play, they needed to have a 3-foot minimum wall netting covering the dugout areas. So if you're familiar with the Bird Bath and Roadrunner Field, you know that the dugout is not the prettiest of sights. It is what it is. So what they did to accommodate that requirement is, it looks like they poured a slab of concrete to extend it out, and then they put up a railing that covers the length of it and then kind of curls around to cover the edge of it, and then they put some netting, maybe Netting Pros. I'm not sure. I know that they're a big one in the industry, but put some netting up there for some safety. So that's one that fans will see when they go out to the games here in a few weeks. They did a little modification to center field in the batter's eye. When we reached out for official comments, it was, I think, just normal maintenance updates. And then Greg Luca from the San Antonio Express, his article pointed to that as well, just normal maintenance, improved updates. I'm hoping, I haven't confirmed this yet, I'm hoping that it's also to comply with the ESPN Plus requirements for games being on ESPN Plus. So I'm hoping that with the improvements to center field, they can put some better cameras out there that improve the viewing experience for those at home. And then another thing that teams have to do is they have to have a action clock or a pitch clock visible. They only have to have one visible on the field. It can be moved. They can have more than one, of course, but they have to have at least one so that the umpires can see where the pitch clock is at in terms of pace of play. So those are kind of the more official ones that had to be done to comply with things. But it was probably about 2 months ago now, went out to the Bird Bath. I was on campus, and depending on how I can get home, sometimes I can drive past it to get on to 1604 and notice some very heavy machinery, very forcefully taking down the bleachers behind home plate. And so, listeners are probably well aware of now that there is some improved seating coming to the Bird Bath, and it's going to be in the form of premium home plate seating with chair backs and an improved press box, a bigger press box. And going out there as late as today, it seems like they're rocking and rolling. And the nice thing about, so we saw the bleachers get taken down, and a lot of people were like, all right, well, we haven't seen an official statement from UTSA yet. Alamo Audible reached out and got some confirmation that there was some improved seating, but you still wonder, okay, what is this going to look like? Because improved seating could be a lot of different answers. But what I noticed on my end is it was getting a little late into the off season, and we still hadn't seen anything yet for season tickets. So I was like, well, I hope that this means that that improved seating is coming along, and they want to wait until it's confirmed. So last week on Twitter, Ben Price confirmed that there was going to be an update soon, and within a few hours saw the tweet come out for both softball and baseball that there's going to be, for the first time ever, chairback seating options for season tickets. And so fans can purchase those for $100 a ticket. $35 of that goes to your RAF donation and your account for loyalty points and all of those things. So you're getting 30 games worth of baseball for $65. Even if you want to look at it $100, that's a little over $3 a game. I mean, I was talking to Jeremy beforehand about reasons to come out. You can get, out to the field for a couple bucks and have a great seat. We still haven't seen seats go up. The first game is February 16th against UT Arlington for baseball. So that's the deadline. And now the pressure's on them to make it happen with actually selling these improved seating. But I'm excited. We were talking, David and I were talking during the break about how great that location is for baseball. You've got Chaparral in the distance. You've got other dorms in the distance. It's real easy to get to on campus. It's real easy to get to for people that aren't students right off 1604. I mean, 1604 is kind of a mess right now, but ease of access right there, a quick walk across the parking lot to the park. And I think keeping the field where it is and then finding out a way to do improvements to where you can preserve all of that is great. And if that means doing inability blocks, so be it. Anything helps, and it's something is better than nothing. And I think that this is kind of the first step in hopefully some big improvements to the bird bath. And that's what was most fun about, when I was talking to James last week, was I told him, I was like, hey, you're the first alumni or alumnus that I get to have on my podcast where we can actually say that the field that you played on isn't for the most part the same field that they're still playing on today. Because for a long time, a lot of guys, Trent Lockwood, Ryan Flores, all those guys, it was kind of like, well, it's still pretty much the same facility as when I played there. So still a long ways to go. A lot that could be done, but it's a great start. And I think it's going to just make the viewing experience of the bird bath even better.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this all costs plenty of money, and they've got a fundraiser coming up that should be done by this Friday. Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, so it's the annual Birdies 4, FORE, Birdies 4 golf baseball fundraiser, and they do it every year. Let me pull up really quick where they do it. So they do it out at the Canyon Springs Golf Course. And I don't know if they've always done it there. I know like the last 2 years they've done it there, and it's a great time. So it starts with lunch and registration, some opening remarks from Coach Hallmark. Generally, he likes to break down what looks like it's going to be the starting lineup for the start of the season. He mentions the importance of the fundraiser, just how much it helps their budget, and whether the registration. There's a lot of fun things you can do during the rounds of golf. You can do some putting to try to win some spirits and some adult beverages. There's mulligans you can buy. You can hit with the pro. You can have one of the players kind of tee off your drive. You can, even if you get a hole in one on one of the holes, win a car from Red McCombs Ford. And then they have a silent auction, and all of that, all the proceeds from that goes to the UTSA budget and helping the UTSA baseball team. We were talking beforehand about some of these sports. It's harder to find the loose ends of that budget, and everything costs money. Things are more expensive now than ever. And so anything to help these guys get what they need and help them focus more on the products on the field, results in a better product on the field. So I think it's going to be a great event. The cold snap came in early enough to where I think by Friday it's going to be great weather, and I'll be out there participating. I can't remember the last time I played a round of golf, but I'm thinking about taking the Andy Bernard approach, and Thursday afternoon going to go out to Topgolf and hit about 1,000 range balls, and my hands will be nice and tender, ready for a round of golf.
Sounds good. And you can find the link to that fundraiser in the description below. Going into other sports, UTSA women's basketball played today against USF, winning 65-42. They are on a 4-game winning streak after a 2-game losing streak to start conference play. They're hitting the ground running. Next for them, they're going to be at UAB on January 21st. The men with conference play, they started 1-1, losing at home to UAB, winning at Rice, and then they lost in a heartbreaker to Memphis on the road. They were up several points with about a minute to go, and just Murphy's Law took effect, and game went to overtime, and Memphis just ran away with it from there. But they play next at Tulsa on January 17th at 7 p.m. David, speaking of other sports, golf is coming up. You want to expand on the what events are coming up?
Yeah, so our first event's actually next week, or next weekend, I guess would be. We start out in Florida, and then kind of go from there. We go to Houston and then Puerto Rico, actually, which is going to be a lot of fun. You can follow all of our stuff at UTSA Men's Golf on both Instagram and Twitter. They post links to our live scoring, so you can be able to follow the entire team through those links. And normally after each round, they post the scores of the team and where the team's at. So if you ever want to follow any of us, it's at UTSA Men's Golf. Thank you guys for tuning in to this episode. Dan, we really enjoyed having you on. Thank you for joining us. Go check out his podcast, Around the Bird Bath, and go check out Alamo Audible as well. He'll be writing for them. Thank you guys, and we'll see you guys next time.